Hello guys, my name is Ranger Lydia and I am a park ranger at Franklin Mountain State Park where I am today. We are the largest urban wilderness in the United States. We're an entire Chihuahuan desert landscape completely protected right inside of El Paso.
Hi everyone, Ranger Nicole out here at Hueco State Park and Historic Site. So I hear you're talking about weathering. So out here at Hueco Tanks, weathering is pretty much responsible for everything that makes Hueco Tanks special. All the uniqueness of Hueco Tanks State Park and Historic Site starts with this rock that I'm sitting on and the weathering processes that formed it. So you can see all around me all of this awesome rock formation. We'll talk a little bit more about how it was formed.
So today we want to share with you guys a little bit about how weathering and erosion affects both of our two parks, Franklin Mountain State Park and Hueco Tanks State Park. And we're going to start off with a little bit of some definitions. So we have weathering and erosion, and I'm going to talk a little bit about deposition as well. So I'm going to go ahead and define that for you. Weathering is when you break down rocks into smaller pieces. Erosion is when you move those pieces from one place to another. And deposition is when those pieces fall or drop in that final location. So let's look around these two state parks and see some different ways that weathering and erosion takes place.
All right, so weathering is constantly changing the Earth's surface. Out here at Hueco Tanks, there are many weathering processes that have made the landscape and this beautiful mountain what it is today. But one of the most important weathering processes here at Hueco Tanks is chemical weathering. So chemical weathering is a process in which water, CO2, and organic acids interact with a rock in a way that changes its molecular structure and slowly dissolves it away. So here at Hueco Tanks, let me see if I can move my camera a little bit so you can get a better view of that mountain. It's so super cool, really special. So chemical weathering out here at Hueco Tanks began long ago, about 35 million years ago, if you can imagine that, when some magma came up from under the earth. So hot magma, like a volcano, right, came up from under the earth, but there was already a bed of limestone, another type of rock, already deposited on the earth. So when this magma came up, it just kind of pushed that limestone up and created what we call a laccolith or a dome. So the magma wasn't strong enough. It wasn't strong enough to escape. Instead, it was trapped underneath that bed of limestone. And it was trapped underneath where it cooled. It cooled underneath there, and that's how it stayed for millions of years. But that's not all that was happening. In those millions of years, weathering was going on. So many different types of weathering. Ranger Lydia is going to talk to you about, I know, mechanical or physical weathering, biological weathering, but there was also chemical weathering. So rain that had CO2 and weak acids was falling on that limestone, and limestone rock is particularly susceptible to chemical weathering. So it was falling on that rock, slowly dissolving it away until we were left with the structure that we see here. And you can kind of tell, right? It does look a little bit like an igneous intrusion, like a volcano might look, right? And underneath it's kind of like a mushroom shaped. And scientists or geologists can tell this because of what we see around here. So from here, if I turn my camera around, I'm going to turn my camera around here. You can see the mountains out that way, and those mountains are primarily limestone mountains. So geologists looked at the layers of the rock and where they stood in the period of time. Most of the landscape around here has limestone rock, which tells us, right, that the limestone was weathered, it eroded, and that it was deposited around this formation. So Hueco Tanks is such a cool place to really get an idea of what types of weathering can be seen and what types of weathering shape our landscape, because without weathering, Hueco Tanks would not be what it is today.
Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth and I am one of the park interpreters here at Hueco Tanks State Park and Historic Site. So today I'm joining you all to talk to you about biological weathering. So weathering is the breakdown process of rocks and minerals. So biological weathering is when animals, plants, and microorganisms break down rock. So we do have a few different examples throughout the park, our first one being the one right behind me. So I'll kind of scooch it over. So you see these really vibrant splotches of color, right? I'll even go up a little higher. So it kind of looks like moss, right? Moss being a plant, but this is actually not even a plant and not even moss. This is something known as lichen. So lichen is a pretty complicated life form in that it's actually two separate organisms, one being fungi and the other one being algae, or a organism that can photosynthesize. But lichen actually is what's known as a mutualistic partnership. So meaning both organisms are benefiting mutually from each other. So the fungi provides the structure for the algae to live on, and the algae then photosynthesize in the sun, providing the food and nourishment for the fungi. So a really fun way we like to remember what lichen is Freddy Fungus provides the home, Alice Algae provides the food, and the relationships on the rocks, but from the look of it, I think they're doing pretty good. So lichen, as they grow into much larger organisms, they can actually break down the rock much more significantly than our little ones here. They can actually release chemicals which break down the rock, which also benefits the lichen because they can then take up those minerals released during that process. But then again, it does break down and make the rock a bit more fragile, so they don't want to do that too much. But this is just one example of how a microorganism can break down rock. So another example of biological weathering is how plants can affect rocks and break them down as well. So I'm showing you some footage of where our trees like to grow in the park. I want to go to this guy. So our trees really like to grow in the cracks and crevices of the park, mainly because when they land in a crack or crevice and start to grow, because of the crack, it almost acts like a funnel, so all the rain and all the water goes straight towards their roots. And you can imagine once a tree starts to grow from the water, sunlight, those roots go deeper and deeper into the rock, and then the tree also starts to grow, which can often result in added stress and tension in the rock, which can lead to rocks eventually cracking and weathering down. Alright, so our final example of a type of biological weathering is weathering caused by animals. So we have about 3 different ways animals can weather down rock. The first one being through urination. So when animals pee or defecate on the rock, all that acid in their urine can actually weather away the rock, either directly depositing it or when rain washes off the urine, that uric acid has to go somewhere, so it ends up kind of eating away at the rock. Another way animals can weather rock is the animals that like to kind of rub up against on surfaces, so that is eventually going to kind of smooth the rock down and break away maybe fragments of rock or just kind of weaken it. The final example is when animals like to burrow either by the rock or in the rocks, cracks and crevices, things like that. So there's a few different animals that like to do this. The smallest ones being ants. Ants, when they excavate their dens, they actually remove pieces of soil and rock away from those areas and out. Earthworms are another example of this. If we go a little bit bigger, reptiles also like to bury into the rocks and soils. And finally, the larger animals being pocket gophers, kangaroo rats, and the biggest one here is our American badger. So all these different animals can actually affect the way our landscape looks by weathering the rock away, just slowly chipping away at it. Good, thanks. So for the next question, just remember what biological weathering is. So it's when a plant, an animal, or a microorganism wears away rock. So just think about a few examples in your own backyard. It could be from a little ant clearing a den to a larger squirrel maybe making a nest. Doesn't matter how small or how big, all animals wear away at the rock, and no rock is immune to weathering.
So another way that weathering can take place is through physical means, very often wind, rain, or ice. Here, you'd be surprised, we do actually have weathering due to ice sometimes. If you see, I'm right up next to this cliff, and it's got all these little creases in it. Now, water is a very powerful means of weathering, and when it does get wet, that water seeps into these cracks and can stay there. And then if it freezes at night, that water expands and it kind of pushes a chunk of rock out of the cliffside, and then it builds up. And then later, when we have massive rains, we have events like rock slides that cause erosion through water and gravity that bring those big rocks down, like you can see up here behind me. We're going to take a closer look at that. Wow, we made it up here. And this is an example of what we call a scree slope. Scree is what we call these big pieces of rock that have fallen down from the mountain. And if you look closely at them, you can see this is very different from something like a river rock that's very smooth on the edges. With those, as the rocks have tumbled through the river, they've hit against each other and they've smoothed out. These have not done that. They have been knocked off of that cliffside through ice, through time, through gravity, and they still have these sharp edges. And you can see that they've built up in this big slope that has kind of fallen down from the mountainside, one through gravity, but also through water. In 2006, we had what people called the 1,000-year flood. It was a huge flood, and it was one of the biggest that we've ever seen here in El Paso. And during that flood, a lot of these rocks were taken down the mountain in these big rock slides that you can still see today. So that's an example of ways that rocks fall off or weather from a cliff face through ice, and then how they erode down the slope through gravity and water, and now they're deposited here. Let's look at some other places where we see weathering, erosions, and depositions here in the Chihuahuan Desert landscape. So, you've learned a little bit about chemical and biological and physical weathering. So what about erosion? What happens to these rocks once they're broken down? Well, there's a lot of things that can happen, and a really great example of how erosion happens in the Chihuahuan Desert here in El Paso is right here. I am just off the Nature Walk Trail in the Tom Mays unit of Franklin Mountain State Park, and I'm in what we call an arroyo here in El Paso. Some people might call it a desert wash, maybe a dry creek bed, but we like to call it an arroyo here. You might be familiar with them. You might have one near your house or some place close to your school. You probably have seen one of these before. What it is a spot that water runs through when it rains. The whole desert landscape here in El Paso and throughout the Chihuahuan Desert is completely covered with a network of these arroyos, and this is like a storm water drainage system that the desert has. When we have a big strong storm, all the water pools into these arroyos and runs down them here. Why it's such a great place to look at erosion is that if you look at the bottom of this stream bed, we've got all of these little different types of rock. And you'll see all different colors of rock. And I can tell you this rock came from way up high in the mountains. Probably this one too. This one might have started up high, might have started low. I don't know. It could have come from various different places. But all of these different kinds of rocks are mixed together because they've all been brought down and deposited here. And we can actually, this is a really great spot to see erosion and deposition together, because I'm sitting next to this little cliff almost, and this is a cliff that's been made by water running past here during our big storms, and it has cut away the side but also allowed us to see how in the past all of this rock has been deposited, all this soil has been deposited. So what I can tell from these deposits is that wherever I see really large rocks, that was probably a big storm, because big rocks, they're hard to move. So you have to have a lot of water in order to move them. And then where you see a lot of much smaller rocks, that was probably a time period when there was softer rains. We would occasionally have water running through these and moving some rocks, but not any of the big rocks. So you can really see that deposition here. You can see how this side has been eroded. And these, like I said, this is the stormwater drainage system of the Chihuahuan Desert. Before we wrap up this video, we want to talk about one other aspect of weathering and erosion. What about human impacts? How do humans impact weathering and erosion in our area?
Weathering here at Hueco Tanks has made many different features that really make the landscape and the history of the park what it is. So because of the huecos, these holes in the rock, and I don't know if you can see some up here, some of those holes in the rock, they hold water when it rains, which makes this a really great place for, as you can see, plants, wildlife, and all those things. The water, the plants, the wildlife have brought people here for thousands of years. So Hueco Tanks has a rich history of indigenous communities, Native Americans, that we see their stories and their history all over this really special place. So like I said earlier, people have been coming to Hueco Tanks for thousands of years, which means we see some really interesting features out here that are clues or artifacts that tell us about how people lived and how they utilized everything here at Hueco tanks. So I'm going to show you a really cool feature out here. Let me turn my camera around. So take a look at this rock. It is really, really shiny. I don't know if you can tell right here. It is very, very slippery, very slick. So this rock is in a way weathered, but this is something different than we've talked about so far. This is a human impact. So this is called body polish. Basically what this is from is people sliding around on that rock, slowly weathering and polishing this rock to its super slick surface. So we're gonna slide in here. So in this little crevice, very faintly, we can see some of the pictographs left here by Native Americans. Who utilized this land for at least 10,000 years. So now that we know that some of these images are in here, it makes sense why this rock has been so heavily utilized.
So you learned earlier how big roots from trees can cause weathering by splitting apart rock. However, roots can also prevent erosion, especially when they're small, fibrous roots through soil. They keep the soil in place and prevent it from eroding away or being carried off by wind and rain. When we build trails out here in the Franklin Mountain State Park, we're very careful about where we build them, because in order to build that trail, you have to take away the plants and use physical force to pack down the dirt to keep it in place, which is not as effective as living plant roots. So when we want to get to some place that's up a steep slope, like where I am now, we will sometimes use a technique called switchbacks. That means you cut the trail across the side of a slope and then turn it around and cross the back. That way it's not as steep. Sometimes when humans are hiking these trails, they think that they'll save time and energy by not going all the way around the switchbacks. So they cut the switchbacks. And that causes what you see behind me here. Ooh, sliding down this slope. This is what's called cutting a switchback. The trail actually goes across that top around to my left and down where the tripod is standing right where you are from the perspective of the video. This slope here is very dangerous. It's very slippery. And people have caused it because they think they'll take a shortcut. In actuality, you're not saving energy because you're taking a much harder route. And every time someone follows one of these, they cause more rocks to fall down, they prevent more plants from growing to hold the soil in place, and they make it easier for water and rain to wash this soil away. It's really bad for the environment, but it's also bad for people, because as other hikers come by, they see these trails and think they're the route up, they take them and they can get hurt or injured, and we have to come out and rescue them. Or sometimes people try to find ways around these really badly washed out trails and end up getting lost. So this is a really negative way that humans can impact the environment through erosion. So I am so glad you were able to come along with us on this discovery, this journey, looking at the different ways that weathering and erosion affects the El Paso area. I hope you learned a whole lot, and hopefully you'll be able to come out to one of our state parks and see it for yourself. Stay safe out there, have fun, and see you around.